Buenos días, muchas gracias por venir a esta conversación con Jeff Koons en el marco de la presentación de la obra Bailarina en la Explanada. La obra se presenta en el marco del proyecto Explanada de Malva, que ustedes recordarán se inició en el 2001 con la fundación del museo e incluyó obras de Jesús Soto, por ejemplo, Arthur Leyer, Lamela, Sabelo. Se recontinuó en el 2015 con la obra de Leandro Ehrlich, incluye la obra de Jeff Koons y va a continuar también este año con la obra de Alicia Penalba. Para realizar este proyecto contamos con la colaboración especial de FATE. En la ocasión de la presentación de la obra de Jeff Koons, que se va a develar ahora en minutos, tenemos el placer de presentar a Jeff, que está aquí en Buenos Aires y que va a conversar públicamente con Agustín Pérez Rubio, director artístico de Malva. No lo voy a presentar a Jeff Koons. Jeff Koons es ampliamente conocido en Buenos Aires, es una de las figuras centrales del arte contemporáneo desde sus inicios en la década del 80. Sí quería tomar 2 segundos para agradecer muy especialmente la colaboración de la Embajada de Estados Unidos en Argentina, el Palacio Duhó Park Hyatt también de Buenos Aires, a FATE, a quien ya nombré por el apoyo por el proyecto Explanada, y también a la colección Oceana Bal Harbour de Miami Consultatio, que es el prestador de la obra. Sin más, le damos la bienvenida entonces a Jeff Koons y a Agustín. Gracias.
Muy buenos días a todas y a todos. No les veo nada, pero gracias por atender esta charla que vamos a hacer y, como no, por estar con nosotros durante el opening y la presentación de Bailarina. Les voy a explicar un poco cómo va a ser esta conversación. En primer lugar, como saben, yo voy a hablar en castellano a Jeff y Jeff va a escuchar mi traducción. ¿Everything all right? ¿Ya? Yes. Primero de todo, Jeff, muchísimas gracias de parte de Malva. Ya Eduardo te ha dado personalmente sus gracias por venir, pero como director artístico y junto con todo el equipo de Malva estamos encantados que hayas venido y que seas justamente una de las cosas más atractivas de tener a Jeff aquí, es ver la pasión por la que desarrolla su trabajo, sus inquietudes y su amor por su propia obra, hasta el cuidado máximo, ¿no?, de todo ello. Entonces, muchísimas gracias por venir en este primer viaje y primera estancia en la Argentina, que esperemos no sea la última. Y por otra parte, les quería comentar que aparte de yo hablar en castellano y Jeff en inglés, vamos a pasar unas imágenes, una selección de imágenes durante nuestra charla. Son unas imágenes que tanto Jeff con su estudio, con Lauren y otra gente ha seleccionado. Y entonces nos va a servir para comenzar y hacer una idea de paseo, de trayectoria, tanto por lo personal y también por lo profesional. En este sentido, me gustaría que justamente las primeras imágenes, como hemos hablado, seas tú un poco quien nos cuente sobre todo tu empezar y tu relación con tu obra y tus inicios. Gracias.
Okay. Augustine, can I just also state, I am thrilled to be here. It is absolutely wonderful to be in Buenos Aires, to be here at the Malva Museum. It's so meaningful to me to be able to have this relationship, first with Mr. Constantini, and then through Mr. Constantini with the public of Buenos Aires. I mean, I am thrilled, and I hope that my work engages with the public and can bring some joy and some future possibility to viewers. So I'm just thrilled to be here right now.
Muchísimas gracias, Jeff. Bueno, vamos a comenzar por esta. No sé bien dónde tengo que pulsar para que esto haga algo. Como siempre, just a second. A ver si es así. Ok. Vamos a empezar quizá esta charla comenzando por tus orígenes. Tus orígenes en York, en Pensilvania, y de una familia donde justamente tu padre tenía una tienda. Y creo que esa idea de Yo también, mi familia tiene tienda de decoración también y de cortinajes y de maneras, y creo que eso, en cierta manera, cambia la percepción estética cuando eres niño, ¿no? Háblanos un poco de esta imagen y de todos tus comienzos.
Okay. This is an image of my father, Henry J. Coons. This was the storefront of my father's furniture store. And my father was an interior decorator and sold furniture. And I really learned aesthetics from my father. And I think that I also learned a joy of people and of interacting with people in the community. My father taught me vision, and so when he was designing somebody's home, he would start with some graph paper, and he would lay everything out. He would design the exact size of the chair, the exact dimension of the couch, the size of the lamp, and he really showed me that if you have vision, you can do anything, and you can foresee what the end result is going to be. So I'm really grateful to my father for that, and my father was also my first dealer. So right in the center of the window there, where you see these three kind of more decorative prints, that's where my father would show my artworks. And so I really learned this sense of support and commitment, and then what was really important in life was to follow my dreams, my passion, and not to worry about anything else. That will come along, you know, if you're really committed to your work.
Yo creo que justamente esta imagen es primordial para entender gran parte del trabajo, porque creo que justamente en lo que vamos a seguir viendo en otras piezas, en esta idea de las vitrinas, de los productos o los objetos que Jeff hace donde realmente le importa a la gente más que el objeto, pero donde hay una idea que creo que recorre también todo el trabajo, que es el deseo. Es decir, como visitante, como comprador, tienes ese deseo. La pulsión siempre recorre parte de tu obra.
Before you change, just
sorry.
one second. No, that's fine. I think another important thing about this image and my father's store is these objects are really just displaying themselves. I mean, the chair is just displaying itself, the lamp, they're just there displaying themselves. This is an image of myself at 3 years of age, and I was brought up in York, Pennsylvania, and it's not that well known of a fact, but for a very brief portion of time, I think it was 3 days, York was the first capital of the United States, and the Continental Congress met there. They actually created the words, the United States of America, joining them together in York, Pennsylvania. So I think this has always helped me feel a sense of a tie to history and to a community, and that there's something greater than the self, that the self should flourish and expand, but that your connections with your community have even more relevance. But we were participating in a parade there for one of the centennial or something of York, one of the celebrations. This is an architectural piece. This is a shoe house. There was a gentleman who lived in York who made shoes and sold them, and this is the house that he created for himself. And so it always had an impact on me, this sense of fantasy architecture. And as time goes on, eventually, and we'll come to pieces like Split Rocker and The Puppy, they're really influenced by this, the idea of creating your own shelter and to be able to have fantasy. This is downtown Philadelphia, and on top of City Hall, there's a sculpture of William Penn. And William Penn was created by Alexander Calder's grandfather, and he was a very important artist and made a lot of contributions to the public sculptures in Philadelphia. But my aunt, my father's sister, who lived to be 103, absolutely a wonderful, energetic woman, but she was really the first to introduce me to art history. And she took me to Philadelphia, to the Philadelphia Museum. She lived there, and took me up into William Penn. And what an amazing physical, visceral experience, because if you go up to the top of the building, it's like a Jules Verne scene from, Journey to the Center of the Earth or something. You have this fantasy architecture, and then you could feel the power of the sculpture. And this type of movement, this visceral feeling that you could get from scale and from size and from history and from a sense of the community, I think was very important to experiencing Philadelphia in that piece.
Creo que estas primeras imágenes que Jeff nos muestra justamente dan un peso específico a todo el trabajo que luego vas a continuar. Es decir, la idea de las vitrinas, la idea de esos carruajes, ¿no?, de tu abuela, la idea de las estatuas, es decir, ese valor añadido a una especie de gusto de clase media americana, donde él luego conceptualmente va a trascender todo este legado, ¿no? Creo que es importante estas imágenes y que él mismo las haya traído y que se sienta, porque creo que es un artista que se siente muy atado a su propio pasado, a quién es, y también, por otra parte, muy global. Es decir, entender lo local y lo global como una estrategia también dentro de tu arte, ¿no?
Augustino, I think in the collection, in the Malba collection, I don't know what the artist's name is right now, but they have the image of the working class
Avaporú,
family.
Tarsila do Amaral.
That's right. I think looking at the images that I presented of my history so far,
Perdón, la familia obrera,
Yeah.
The Workers' Family.
The Workers'
Yeah.
Family.
Oscar Boni, la familia obrera del 68.
Yeah, yeah.
Ayer estuvimos paseando,
Yeah.
enseñándole la colección, y yo le hablaba de la importancia de esa pieza y la relación que tiene con su obra, ¿no?
So, I mean, I look at that image and I feel that connection, and I think that I lived that experience. My father and my mother set up a situation that we always felt a sense of social mobility. We would always do interesting things. We would take interesting vacations, and they were very, very generous in giving us experience that we could help create our own lives, a sense of our own being and possibility. But at the same time, we always felt that we were participating socially in movement, that we always had a future and we could create our own future. And so I could feel connection to that piece.
Luego más tarde veremos también la conexión que a mí me parece que existe, por ejemplo, en todos los tableaux vivants que Jeff ha presentado a lo largo de su carrera, desde Made in Heaven hasta algunas esculturas que tienen esa relación con lo performativo y con presentar esa idea de los personajes también desde un medio fotográfico, etc. Pero eso lo vemos más tarde. Ahora viene una fotografía muy especial, ¿no? Cuéntanos, ¿quién hizo esta foto?
I took this photograph, but as I mentioned, my background in art history would have come from my aunt. My parents exposed me to many, many things. I took art lessons from the age of 7, but not really art history. But art history, eventually, I go to art school and I get an essence of it. But an artist that I would have been aware of would have been Salvador Dali. My parents knew that I enjoyed his work. And I think the reason that I enjoyed it is Dada and Surrealism, especially Surrealism, deals with internal life. It deals with going inward and learning to accept the self. You deal with the dream that you had the night before. You're looking inward, this inward journey. And so I was exposed to Surrealism and to Dali at a very young age. The first kind of the tabletop book with the Persistence of Memory on the cover, that was probably one of my first art history books. But my mother informed me when I was 18 that Dali lived half the year in New York. So I decided I would call him up. I called up the St. Regis Hotel where he stays, and I asked for Salvador Dali's room, and they put me through. And he answered the phone. And I told him that I was a young artist, that I really enjoyed his work, and I would love to meet him. And he said, well, come to New York this weekend. I'll meet you in the lobby of the hotel at noon, and I'll see you then. And so I got on the bus, I went to New York, and right at noon he came down. And we moved from the lobby. He informs me that he has an exhibition at the Knoedler Gallery. He was showing his hologram work that he did with Alice Cooper. And he had this fantastic painting that he's standing in front of, the head of the royal tiger, at so many feet. And then if you go back further, you see the 3 heads of Lenin. And it's a fantastic piece. But he just gave me the generosity of his time. And he posed for this photograph. I remember I was young and I was shuffling my camera around, and he put his mustache up and he was saying, you know, come on, kid, I can't hold this pose all day. But he was very generous. And I think Haussmann's daughter said that whenever you met Salvador Dali, he made you feel like it was the most important moment of his life that he was sharing with you. And as far as like wearing the buffalo coat, wearing the diamond studded tie tack and his cane and putting the mustache up. You know, when Dali woke up in the morning, it wasn't like that. It was drooping down here, you know. But I was always very, very grateful to his generosity. He made me feel like I could do this. I could participate too. I could be part of a group of people that are having a dialogue and a discussion about the possibilities of life, and to be a part of something.
Dime una cosa, Jeff. Aparte del trabajo de Dalí, ¿qué aprendes del propio personaje? Porque creo que Dalí, dentro de una línea de artistas que han trabajado con su propia imagen como icono, ¿no? Desde Dalí, desde Duchamp haciendo José Lavie, desde Warhol, es decir, hay ahí una línea de conexión entre artistas que no solamente son importantes como artistas a partir del trabajo, sino por su concepción no voy a nombrar el ego, sino de self-promotion o su imagen realmente es importante. ¿Eso te atrajo y aprendiste algo de ahí cuando eras joven?
I would think the self-promotion part gets a little kind of overexpanded or kind of overlooked. I think the important thing is that art is a vehicle that can transform your life, and that you can transform your own life, whatever you can kind of envision, and at the same time, then you can transform your community. And the aspect of generosity, I mean, I think Dali was first and foremost interested in having experiences himself, and then to be able to share that with others. I think that he was extremely generous. I know there's one side that can look at Dali and it's like Dali dollars or whatever if you get into the whole Breton thing. But actually at his core, he's a very generous man.
Pasamos ahora ya, creo que, a los primeros trabajos de Jeff, a estos inflables.
One other Dali story I just want to tell. As far as his generosity, James Rosenquist, the pop artist, met Dali. And they went out to lunch one time at the 21 Club in New York. And they sat down to have lunch, and they ordered their lunch. And when Dali's arrived, he had ordered asparagus. He took the asparagus and he put it on top of his head. And this kind of wet asparagus was just kind of sitting there, and the liquid starting to come down his face. And that's how he sat throughout his lunch. He was being generous to Jim.
Los primeros trabajos, bueno, no son los primeros, porque los primeros son los dibujos que ponías en la vitrina de tu padre y vendías ya, sino que son los primeros inflables después que presentas ya.
That was my first rabbit. And so that's 1978, 1979. And these are store-bought objects. And I became attracted to ready-made objects because it was a symbol that everything's already here. You know, everything's already here in the universe, nothing leaves. And if you just open yourself up to everything, that everything can be exposed and you can come into contact with it. So I enjoyed just working with things that already exist and started to participate in acceptance. And that the rabbit, the inflatable,
Closer,
okay, that the rabbit, the inflatable, these are all metaphors for people. They're inflatables. If we take a breath, it's a symbol of optimism. We have life's energy. If we exhale, it's like the symbol of death, our last breath. And so they're in an optimistic position. Can we just go back to the the rabbit. When I created this piece, I felt such a sensual intensity. I had to go out and drink a couple beers. I was so supercharged. The colors and the affirmation that this work had. You know, when you move around, the abstraction changes. The rabbit is reflected. You see that the pink shifts in the back, the flower shifts. And it's like in Hegel philosophy, inorganic objects participate in procreation through reflection. And I was so supercharged. And so this is when I started to really come in contact with experiencing physically my own work and always wanting more, wanting a higher dose of this type of excitement and energy, and at the same time an intellectual development.
Me gustaría comentar estos trabajos porque creo que siendo los primeros de Jeff, tienen una coherencia absoluta en lo que vamos a ver hoy. Es decir, creo que es un artista que es muy coherente a sí mismo desde el principio hasta el final. En estos trabajos vemos la noción de ready-made, como él ha dicho, es decir, un deudor directo de lo más duchampiano. También vemos acá una relación directa, y dime qué te parece, con Robert Smithson, con Donald Judd, es decir, esos reflejos que se siguen dando ahora en esa bailarina que tenemos de otra manera, es decir, y luego el tema de los niños. ¿Qué hay en esa infancia? ¿Qué hay en esta creación de esta, digamos, pureza infantil que se repite también en tu trabajo, ¿no?
Do you notice the carrot to the mouth is like this situation here? And so it's you know, making references to so many different layers of meaning. It could be a symbol of the Playboy bunny. It's a symbol of Easter, of resurrection. It's a symbol of an orator, somebody making proclamations, you know. But you know, I love in youth, there's complete acceptance. I mean, children are open to everything. I remember lying in the grass and just, you know, smelling the grass, enjoying the color of it and thinking green, it's so wonderful, and rolling over on my back and looking at the sky and blue. There's this openness and this acceptance, openness to experience. And, you know, the more that you open yourself up to the world, the more anxiety is actually removed. I think a lot of people have a hard time opening themselves up to life because of anxiety, and actually through acceptance and opening oneself up, it removes anxiety.
Pasamos ahora a otra serie, que es justamente Pre-New and The New. Aquí tenemos la imagen que formaba parte junto con la exposición que presenta Jeff. Es él con la edad de 3 años, 5 años, 5 years? 4 years. Y este retrato, esta caja de luz, iba también con algunas de estas piezas que son famosamente conocidas como las aspiradoras, y son esta relación entre los niveles mínimos de los, podemos entender, del minimal de Dan Flavin, o de la manera de, junto con la asociación con objetos de uso corrientes por las amas de casa americanas. En esta relación a mí me gustaría hablar de 3 cosas. La primera, de la idea de performatividad y de ser consciente de la posición del artista, ¿no? Es casi elegético que te presentes a ti mismo como el artista, pero con una edad muy temprana. Y segundo, esa relación del mercado digo del middle class market, con esos utensilios que todo el mundo encontraba. Esa especie de el high and low, para mí es como Dan Flavin met el ama de casa. Cuéntanos un poco en toda esta relación que se hicieron muy famosas en los 80.
I worked, my first job when I moved to New York when I was 20 was at the Museum of Modern Art. And I worked there for about 3 years. And I would go through the collection every day. And I loved Duchamp and Man Ray. And I wanted to add to the idea of the ready-made. So I decided to work with objects and to display their newness. And that this was an ultimate state of being. I was always reading a lot of philosophy of Kierkegaard and Sartre, and Nietzsche, involved with existentialism. And so I thought that this ultimate state of being, this state of newness, through not participating. So an object has its most integrity never performing. It's just, I would take a vacuum cleaner right out of the box, I'd encase it, I'd put it under kind of white industrial white light, and let it just display its integrity of birth. And that by not participating, it had its most integrity, which is just the opposite of people. For us to display our integrity, we have to participate in life.
Si te fijan,
If you notice, I think my sound's a little different right now, but if you see the side of the vacuum cleaner, it says wet dry. That's like Kierkegaard's either or being and nothingness, Sartre.
Como vemos, continúa también Jeff a lo largo de esa trayectoria con algo que él ha explicado muy bien, que es esa idea que toda su obra también se relaciona con el aire, ¿no? Es decir, los inflables, los vacuum cleaners, los balloons que veremos luego, es decir, está muy presente esta idea, pero también, sobre todo, a mí me interesa esta idea de algo que justamente no se puede tocar, que está encerrado. Crean estas piezas, cuando las tienes delante, para mí es como que te atraen y a la vez parece algo como una incubadora, ¿no? Como un niño que no puedes tocar. Es como esa sensación del deseo contenido.
You know, these works are trying to become life's energy. I mean, they're always trying to art to become life, and you know that you're going to fail. You're never getting up over the wall, but you always strive. And so these pieces were trying to present such a Gestalt situation of impact, of something really dealing with the eternal here and aspects of mortality, that it would become life's energy. And there's a sexualness to these objects too, both masculine and feminine, and also almost a hierarchy of a family structure.
Este es el tercero, uno de los... tú lo has comentado, otro de las líneas de relación de gran parte de su trabajo, que son las nociones con el sexo, pero que luego veremos, o con la sexualidad también de los niños, la explícita, etc. Luego vamos a comentar. Pasemos a la siguiente serie de trabajos, que para mí es una de las exposiciones más importantes de Jeff y las series, que es Equilibrium. Y sobre todo, me gustaría pasarlas, algunas de las tres imágenes, sobre todo porque me gustaría, Jeff, como comentamos ayer, hablar un poco del contexto, porque estamos hablando de la obra, pero también hay que entender a Jeff Koons dentro del contexto de Nueva York, de los años 80, de East Village, de esos jóvenes que querían triunfar y jóvenes que arriesgaban dentro de la escena artística neoyorquina, y que justamente una galería que se llamó International with Monument, justamente le llamó a él y a Peter Halley para hacer una exposición, y era una galería que mucha gente no sabe, que uno de los partners era un importante artista latinoamericano, Meyer Weissman, que junto con Jeff y con Peter Halley y Ashley Bickerton, luego del East Village pasaron a formar parte ya de exposiciones en Sonnabend o Leo Castelli. Fue alguien, junto con Jeff y todo el equipo de gente, quiero que entienda la gente muy bien el momento histórico, ¿no? Cuéntanos también sobre la serie y sobre la reacción de ese momento del East Village.
The work we were looking at before, The New, I started that work in the beginning of the 80s, 1980, 81, and it cost a tremendous amount of money for me to make these works, the double-deckers, I made triple-deckers, and so I was, showing in commercial galleries, but my work never really connected with the neo-expressionist movement that was taking place or the work that was being made. So I was kind of like an odd person out, always kind of pushed a little bit to the side, involved in the kind of the underground art world of New York, showing at alternative spaces, artist space, or the Renaissance Society in Chicago, or at different universities. But my work was always still kind of outside any type of more mainstream presentation. But I think to a newer generation of younger artists, I was somebody that had street credibility, that I had been around, I'd been showing my work. I made an exhibition, a group show, in Venezuela, in Caracas, and I believe it was 1981, 82, and Meyer Weissman, this young Venezuelan artist, saw the show, and was really impacted by the work. And he, in particular, really liked my work. So when he moved to New York and he decided to open up a gallery, there was kind of a movement of a lot of young artists kind of taking control of their own destiny, and they decided, well, they'll open a gallery themselves. He said, look, I saw this artist, Jeff Koons. Where is he? How can I get a hold of him? And so he was really determined to show my work. So it was like being embraced by a younger generation to have a little street credibility to their work. And so I talked with Meyer, and I created the Equilibrium show. And this is coming out of the new, where I was working with objects where I had to always keep these very pristine, clean situations, this control element, and always be respecting the integrity of the object, that nothing would happen to it from its moment of birth. And I wanted to go more biological and to create an ultimate state of being, an equilibrium. And again, it's dealing with time. It's dealing with the eternal. This is like pre-birth. This is like the basketball, which is a symbol of social mobility. A lot of ethnic groups have used sports for social mobility. And I wanted to show more of a masculine side of the idea of the ready-made or of consumerism, and more of an analytical side. But at the same time, again, you have this sexual togetherness of both the masculine and the feminine. But this is like being in the womb. It's like a pre-birth. And all forces are equal. It's equilibrium. So both the past and this moment, the right here, right now, and the future, it's very, very metaphysical. All time is kind of being encompassed there.
Me parece interesante también hablar de la dimensión social de tu trabajo. Es decir, creo que muchas veces el trabajo de Jeff queda simplemente eclipsado por los precios, por el mercado, pero en cambio también es interesante leer todo su trabajo desde un punto de vista social, no solamente por el approach de la gente, pero aquí es muy importante en esta serie todas sus fotografías justamente con estos atletas African American. Hay una fotografía muy importante, aquí tenemos Moses, esa idea también del jugador de baloncesto negro como una figura, era aparte el nombre del propio jugador, como una figura bíblica, histórica. También esa fotografía donde todos están juntos y pone como a board desk, es decir, la importancia de esa movilidad social y también de mirar a la comunidad afroamericana, pero por otra parte también me interesa mucho porque es la primera vez que empiezas a utilizar los pósters, es decir, el póster de Nike tal cual aparece sacado de la tienda de deporte, de comprártelas, es decir, que eso luego lo vas a repetir en algunos de tus trabajos al futuro, la relación con lo publicitario.
Everything we've been looking at, they're ready-mades. The basketballs are ready-made, the aquariums are ready-made, the anti-vibration mounts on the stands of the tank were ready-made. It's a ready-made poster. But I wanted people to walk into the Equilibrium show and to see an equilibrium tank and to desire that ultimate state of being, to desire equilibrium. And then you had the sirens on the wall, and the sirens, these deceivers, were the Nike posters. And one was Moses Malone. You can see he's parting the Red Sea. The basketball court is parting, and the balls are kind of in equilibrium within the sea. But he's in a siren telling people, look, I've achieved equilibrium. Go for it. You can do it too. But the tools for equilibrium, if you look, this is a tool. This was the bronze aqualung. So if you put the aqualung on and you went for it, if you tried to achieve equilibrium, it would take you down. It would probably drown you, but if you could get it off your back and resurface to the top, and you saw a bronze lifeboat there, you think you found your salvation, but it would take you right back down. So it was really a discourse that it's about going for it, and that even the equilibrium, it wasn't permanent equilibrium. I could only sustain it for up to about 6 months at a time. But that I was trying to state that white middle-class artists were using art for social mobility, the way other ethnic groups have used sports for social mobility. And, the Moses Malone, that could have been myself, it could have been Julian Schnabel, or it could have been any other artist at that time. But that what's really relevant is going for it. It's about not where you end up, but where you're striving to do.
Continuamos una de las series que continúa, que es Luxury and Degradation. Y Jeff ha traído unas imágenes icónicas, el tren que lleva encima, creo que conocen esta pieza, el alcohol, es decir, es un tren que ahora explicará de metal, y otras pinturas que reproducen fielmente las publicidades que tú veías incluso en el metro, ¿no? En Nueva York, y en alguna entrevista has comentado justamente la relación que había entre esas publicidades desde el centro de Manhattan hasta, por ejemplo, Harlem, ¿no? Cómo iba cambiando también el discurso de esa publicidad, ¿no? Es decir, estos ready-mades convertidos, también tiene toda una parte sexual, muchos de los eslogans, y recordar, estamos hablando de los 80, pasado ya McLuhan, pero sí los medios como un medio de inserción entre ese erotismo de la publicidad, ¿no? Cuéntanos un poco más de esta serie, porque también hablas en muchas ocasiones del metal, ¿no? Del steel como algo proletario, ¿no? Y esa parte social me interesa descubrir en tu obra.
Augustine, it's interesting you mentioned the media in that context, because in the 80s, too, there was also a book, I remember, Subliminal Seduction, that talked about, in advertising, kind of hidden images. But after making the Equilibrium show, I made a body of work called Luxury and Degradation. And this is the first time that I ever cast stainless steel. And I was walking down Fifth Avenue, and I walked past a liquor store, and in the window I saw the Jim Beam J.B. Turner train. And it was in porcelain and plastic. They're liquor decanters that people buy and they collect. And I thought, you know, this would be a wonderful ready-made. And, but what's really important in the work, what the soul of the work is the alcohol. But how can I transform this object? And I thought, I should put it into stainless steel, very, very intoxicating surface, bring it to a polish. It's not a true luxurious material. It's a proletariat material, because I had no desire to have it be in sterling silver or platinum, or because the work was about the potential of people and people embracing themselves and being able to empower themselves. So I decided to take the piece. I contacted Jim Beam. I transformed the piece, put it in stainless steel, polished it, and then I would go to the Jim Beam plant and we would put the soul back into the piece. We'd fill it up with the alcohol. And the interface to the soul is the tax stamp seal. So if you look at the neck of like the engine in the front, the smokestack, if you lift up the smokestack, right there is the tax stamp seal. Or if you slide open the passenger car or the box car, or lift the log on the log car, you always see the tax stamp. And so if somebody wanted to kind of get a 101 lesson in abstraction, they could drink the alcohol. They would feel the abstraction, but they would kill the piece. They would kill the soul of the work.
Continuamos, es una etapa, perdón.
So that was a symbol to me of the middle class. And as Augustine said, I got on the subway in New York, and I went from the lowest income areas that were targeted at $10,000 and less income a year. And I went into Grand Central Station, where they targeted the highest income people, and at that time it was $45,000 plus income. In the advertising industry, that's as far as it would go. They were the boundaries, the parameters. But you would see that the way abstraction was being dealt with to people and being fed to people was at a different level of intensity. And they want people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but at some point, they want degradation to come in so that they can take your economic, political chips from you. And that's the pursuit of luxury, the entanglement of really desiring luxurious objects, really wanting things in silver and platinum. This was an artificial luxury. You've got the intoxication, you've got the desire for transcendence and enlightenment, but the knowledge of being protective to the self and your community.
Me gustaría darles unas notas de contexto. Sobre todo creo que estos trabajos de Jeff hay que ponerlos en relación justamente con el momento histórico del New York, sobre todo de esa etapa de los Neo Geo, a los que se llamó a Ashley Bickerton y a todo ese grupo, pero también hay que ponerlos, como no, en relación con otros artistas que también participaron de International Monument, ¿no? Como gente que luego Sherry Levine y otra gente que justamente adopta directamente el ready-made o como el Winston de Richard Prince. Richard was part of, ¿no? Fue parte de International Monument también. Es decir, también hay que entenderlos en ese momento de la publicidad de masas y en ese contexto histórico, porque no se pueden entender, por supuesto, como obra, pero también que forman parte de la propia poética de Jeff y también de un momento, yo creo que histórico muy importante.
Yes, there was also another gallery that was in New York called Metro Pictures. And so people like Richard Prince, Robert Longo, Jack Goldstein, were also, Sidney Sherman, were also involved with Metro Pictures. Metro Pictures had a little more of a dialogue with what we call appropriation. And Richard always enjoyed more the act of theft. That there's more a sense of danger in the collection of information, taking information. It's like going in undercover, getting something and getting out, and then exposing it. My tradition has always been more in the Duchampian tradition of the ready-made, and that everything's already here. It's about just accepting things, and that, if I felt that I should get permission for something, I would seek permission. If I didn't think that I needed any permission, I wouldn't seek it. I learned that you need permission for more things than you may think. I ended up having some lawsuits later in the 80s during banality. So I think that my work has always had more of a dialogue about optimism and communication than appropriation. Appropriations have dealt more with the act of theft and a little bit of infringing.
Jeff, pero una pregunta, justamente hablando de ese optimismo. ¿Cómo te sientes y qué ocurre cuando la propia sociedad, cuando esos derechos, por ejemplo, muchas veces en tu obra han sido puestos on court, han sido llevados, has tenido que pagar por estos, no, por otro tipo de trabajos? ¿Cuál es tu reacción frente a eso? O sea, ¿pagas y tal o automáticamente no quieres entender esa parte del trabajo como, o sea, o esa parte como, o ese objeto y entonces trabajas en otro? ¿Cuál es tu relación con la propia legalidad de la sociedad que te devuelve esa idea de el reenactment, de volver a tomar algo como algo ready-made?
You know, I've had very, very rare situations that I'll contact somebody and I'll tell them, oh, I really enjoy this object or this image, can I work with it? For somebody to say no. Old Granddad, the liquor company, did back in '86. I made a piece called Travel Bar, and I wanted the bottles inside the travel bar to also contain alcohol. I received permission from Gordon's and Smirnoff, but I didn't from Old Granddad, and so I never filled the bottles. I didn't do it. Generally, people always say yes, very, very seldom. And, you just move on if they do. But it's very, very rare. I would say 1 out of 100 times will somebody say no. Because people basically are supportive to each other and understand their intentions.
Continuamos con una serie clave que es Sanctuary de 1986-87. Y aquí Jeff ha traído 2 imágenes icónicas, como no, el Bunny y Kippenberg. No sé si lo pronuncio bien, Kippenberg. Las 2 son icónicas porque creo que Bunny... Kippenberg. Creo que Bunny se convirtió y es una de las imágenes que aún hoy resuena en parte de su trabajo, en esa idea que yo hablo de la coherencia, desde los primeros inflables hasta esto, hasta los dog balloons que vamos a ver luego. Pero sobre todo a mí me interesa de esta serie varias cosas. La primera es donde ya empiezas a tomar una no jerarquización de lo estético. Es decir, no hay un tema, las diferentes bustos de la mujer italiana, el Kippenfeld, que era, creo que conocen esa pieza, fue la que Chef presentó para Münster, esta gran bienal que se ocurre cada 10 años en Alemania, y es una figura que es un vendedor ambulante en la ciudad y la transforma en esta gran pieza. Pero luego están los balloons, luego hay pequeñas porcelanas de un doctor pinchando a una chica, casi en algo pícaro. Es decir, los niveles estéticos pueden ir de lo infantil a lo perverso, a la bourgeoisie, a casi esa figura de Luis XVI. Es decir, ¿de qué manera se regula tu relación con esos ready-mades?
This comes from the Statuary series, and this was also 1986. So Ileana Sonnabend was started to follow my work, I believe around 1984, and was watching me very closely. And in 86, decided to invite me with the gallery. She also invited other artists that we were talking about, Meyer Weissman, Peter Hawley, Ashley Binkerton, but to participate in a show that they ended up calling Neo Geo, or the Fab Four or something. And so I made 10 works, and I called it Statuary, and the rabbit was one of them. And I thought that I'm going to have a new audience. You know, I was used to this kind of underground New York, but now working with Ileana, there was going to be a whole more international audience, and I wanted to show my history to the ready-made. So if you look at the rabbit, I'm talking back to 1979 with that inflatable pink bunny with the flower, and I'm just trying to show my dialogue with ready-made objects. Everything we've looked at so far is a ready-made. This is a ready-made, and it also relates to the gazing ball. Where I grew up in Pennsylvania, people would put glass globes in their yard on just a little type of bird bath holder. And it's really a symbol of generosity. When you drive by, you captured by this. It kind of tells you where you are in the universe. But it's kind of a visual luxury. And at the same time, it's an image which can be very kind of ironic in that it has so many different levels of meaning. As I mentioned before, it could be somebody making proclamations. It could be a symbol of Easter or a Playboy bunny. It could be so many different things. But I think at its core, it's kind of optimistic. And you have this contradiction of something that's supposed to be a light object, but it's kind of heavy.
Creo que esta pieza es muy importante también dentro de Santuari porque a partir de aquí dejas por unos años de producir cast, o sea, piezas realmente, ¿no? ¿Cómo se dice? Metálicas, porque justamente fue por un problema en Münster cuando realmente te das cuenta de cómo la técnica y la tecnología también tu trabajo es importante para ello, llegar a que tu deseo del acabado sea realmente como tú quieres, ¿no? ¿Nos puedes contar un poco luego estos años de aquí luego a los balloons y a las otras piezas que están?
You know, as I mentioned, working with Ileana, of course, was an individual that really brought American art to Europe. And she was the wife of Leo Castelli, and they had a gallery in New York, and Ileana had a gallery in Paris. So she would take Andy Warhol, Jasper Johns, Bob Rauschenberg, and show everybody in Paris. So she really brought American art to Europe from like the 50s and the 60s work. So she really introduced my work to a whole European audience. And showing at Münster in 1987 was really an important moment for me, probably the most important exhibition I was ever offered to be in. And Caspar Koenig invited me to come to Münster to make a site-specific work. I walked through Münster, and right in the town square was this Kippenkörl. And it's a symbol of self-reliance. It's a man coming to the market with a kip on his back, filled with hares, potatoes, eggs, pigeons. He has tobacco. He has all of these images of self-reliance, that he can take care of himself in agrarian lifestyle. And I thought that, and it was a bronze sculpture in the town square, I thought I want to transform this to show that this identity of self-sufficiency's changed. And I'll put it in stainless steel, bring it to this mirrored finish, polish. And this type of reflection, it's really dealing with a type of transcendence that you'd feel more in a Baroque church than from an agrarian setting. But when I cast the Kippenkirl, the original bronze, molded it and cast it in stainless steel, the foundry banged the piece up against the wall before it cooled, so it deformed it. And it really created a Humpty Dumpty for me because one leg was too short, another arm was too long, the rabbit's ears were about 3 inches too short. And so I had to decide whether to pull out of this really important exhibition or to give this piece radical plastic surgery and to try to put it back together again. And I'm somebody that always respected every aspect of an object. If working with a ready-made, if it had a little nick, I always preserved that nick, or everything about it. It was about appreciating its integrity. So I decided to give it radical plastic surgery. We brought in a great steel man. This was an old-time steel worker, a big guy. He would heat it up till it was white hot and hammer it, and he'd stretch the leg 4 inches, and he would heat it up and spread the chest open. Well, anyways, he put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And for me, it was such a liberating moment that from that time on, I stopped working with ready-mades, and I realized that what I really cared about were people. I cared about the viewer, and it was about their responses to things that was the real ready-made that I cared about. And it was the whole dialogue about them, about their perfection and their imperfection, and this acceptance happening within them, that the object was just metaphor. So from that point, I go on and I make all my things by hand.
Continuamos en el tiempo porque van pasando y llegamos a una de las series más conocidas, Banalidad. Y sobre todo, Jeff ha traído estas 3 piezas, Unsharing the Banality, Michael Jackson and Boobie y Bath. Las 3 junto... Ah, perdón. Oh, sorry. No, me estoy... Oh, perdón. A ver, la primera de ellas creo que es muy importante porque vuelve otra vez a tener una relación también con la asunción de la autorrepresentación. El pequeño que se ve al final es el propio Jeff empujando la banalidad. Aparte, a mí me interesa esta serie porque fue una serie muy mediática. Jeff hizo unos advertisements justamente para Forum, del mismo modo que otros artistas, desde Morris, desde Linda Benglis, habían hecho, pero justamente 4 de ellos, que acá en Argentina se pueden ver en la Fundación Clem, el portfolio, hay una obra, hay una selección de este portfolio, y sobre todo porque tiene esa connotación de lo mediático. En una de esas se ve a Jeff en una clase con niños y en la pizarra pone banalidad, banality as a salvation, ¿no? Banalidad como salvación. ¿Como salvación de qué? Es también la pregunta. Es decir, en ese momento, ¿qué querías justamente transmitir con esta serie de esculturas que van desde pequeñas porcelanas hasta Buster Keaton, desde una mujer duchándose, desde sobre todo varios pupis o elementos que refieren a la infancia, pero también a la vejez, a los animales, etc.
Augustine, what I stated before, what I felt from when I made the Kippenkirl, I wanted to be more specific in my dialogue with the artworks I made. So I decided to work in Europe and to find artisans that normally made pieces for the church or a piece like Ushering in Banality. The artisans I worked with, they would be carving saints. So I wanted to capture this aspect of transcendence that a living material like wood has. But at the same time, it's like a little Himble figurine, you know. This is like a little knick-knack that maybe you would grow up with. And when you're younger, you would think, oh, you know, that's interesting. Or even today, you look at, oh, that's interesting. But somehow you feel as though there's a hierarchy there that you can't really accept it completely on as representing the highest level of things. When my dialogue was really being directed to people, that everything about their being is perfect. and that wherever they are, it's perfect. Whatever happened to them, it's perfect. It's really about this moment forward. And this sense of self-acceptance. Once you have self-acceptance, then you can go outside the self. Then you have the confidence to go outside the self, which takes you to the highest state of being, and I think the objective state, which is the acceptance of others. And so these are metaphors for this process of going outside. And what's really important is the transcendence that you feel. That's the art. What's of value is that transcendence. The object is just a transponder. It's just something that excites and stimulates something for a person towards that journey. But it's what happens to the viewer where the art is.
¿Piensas que todo está, aparte de haberla producido en Padova, right, in Italy, it was made in Italy, right? Aparte de eso, ¿piensas que todas estas series tienen una relación, por ejemplo, yo viniendo de España, con lo que es la imaginería religiosa también? Aparte de que está el famoso Leonardo da Vinci, como es San Juan Bautista y otras piezas relativas a lo religioso, pero más en la concepción de cómo la gente mira para aprender un mensaje y sobre todo también en esa idea de la figuración. ¿Piensas que hay y que trasciende esa parte de la trascendencia, tiene que ver con un espíritu religioso? Porque si bien vemos, la serie anterior era Santuario, esta es la banalidad, pero en cambio se representan estas figuras de ángeles, de figuras aladas. Luego vamos a ver el Made in Heaven, el cielo. Es decir, creo que en tu trabajo también hay una relación con esa idea de lo religioso que quizá puede venir por el barroco, no lo sé.
I made these pieces in St. Ulrich and Valley Gardenia, where they make a lot of the carvings for the church. But it's trying to just communicate transcendence. I don't participate in any organized religion, but I believe in transcendence. I believe that you can expand your parameters, you can become vaster, you can enjoy life and push yourself to greater parameters. I believe in that, and I think that you can also excite your community and they can go to vaster parameters. That's the type of transcendence that I'm referencing. People may have an understanding of it, though, through other aspects of their life.
Creo que también la serie se puede ver, hay también una relación con una cosa como perversa entre lo infantil y lo sexual, en algunos casos, otra más irónico como el Buster Keaton, etc. Y nos encontramos con esta Woman in Tube, que si mal no recuerdo, el cuerpo es el de Ileana, ¿right? La modelo era Ileana, ¿no?
No.
I thought it was. She was.
And especially not Ileana Sonnabend.
No.
No, but I think Ilona.
Ilona.
But no, that's not Ilona.
Okay.
My grandparents, my mother's father and mother, they had a little ashtray that was in their library, their television room. And when I was a kid, I'd always go play with it. And it was an ashtray that came from Japan after the war. And it was a woman lying down on a couch, and her legs were up in the air, right underneath where you were supposed to collect your ashes from a cigarette. And supposedly the heat of the cigarette would make the legs of the woman lying down go back and forth. So I was always very fascinated by this object. And whenever I visited my grandparents, I'd always be playing with this, this object, looking at this woman. And so I know that Woman in the Tub is a reference to that. And it's a reference to that piece. Now, it's also referencing Manet and Degas and other artists in history, and it's referencing the self-acceptance. I think that a lot of children first come into contact with the understanding or the investigation of their own bodies in the bathroom, in the bathtub. And so even this sense of accepting of the self happens in this kind of very remote, private area. But this woman all of a sudden has become a little alarmed, and she's shocked. She's clutching her breast because she realizes that somebody else is in the tub with her. That's a snorkel coming up there. But I'm playing with materials. So the wood came from the church, from the use of the Baroque and the Rococo. But porcelain came from the emperor's kitchen. It came from the king's kitchen. Not everybody had porcelain. Now, today it's completely democratized, and we all can have a little porcelain knickknack or a cup, a plate, different porcelain objects. But in the past, it's a very, very regal material. And it has a sexual quality because it shrinks 19% in the oven. So again, I was trying to exploit this type of aspect of everything being democratized, and this sense of social mobility, that we can continue to expand our parameters.
Pasamos de acá
And
a...
I think sexual energy, in a way, does that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think of somebody just kind of embracing their kind of own sexual being, it's like, okay, I'm all revved up. It's the same type of transcendence taking place of wanting to expand a parameter.
Esta idea que estaba comentando Jeff sobre la idea de la pulsión sexual se queda muy plasmada en justamente esta serie del año 90, que para mí fue más que fascinante. Yo tenía 18 años, fui a la Bienal de Venecia y vi aquel Made in Heaven y me quedé como choqueado. Y a partir de ahí creo que mis relaciones también con estudios sobre gender, sobre imágenes eróticas que compartimos, Jeff aparte es un estudioso de muchos grabados, imágenes, imaginería que tiene que ver con lo sexual y lo erótico. Y como has comentado, hay una relación en toda tu obra también con eso, ¿no? A veces más perversa, a veces más cándida, pero de esa pulsión. A mí me interesa mucho, sobre todo de esta serie Made in Heaven, que la primera obra fue una gran billboard. Otra vez esa idea de mostrar, ¿no?, al otro. Parecía como una imagen promocional de un film que era para la Whitney Biennial o para una exposición en el Whitney, que no se llegó a hacer. Era esa idea y en la que luego trabajaste con quien fue en aquel entonces tu esposa, Ilina, conocida acá por todo el público también como Chicholina, y justamente juntos desarrolláis unas imágenes de fuerte carga erótica y sexual, pero a la vez que tú las tomas justamente como eso, como casi abstracciones y como impulsos, ¿no?, que no tienen que ver con lo pornográfico, aunque a veces es bastante complicado separar. ¿Cuál es la relación con esa imagen, con esa no imagen pornográfica en esa serie?
After I created my Banality show in New York, I mean, that had a huge response. And so the Banality show, people would tell me was like, it was like Liechtenstein's show in '63 or something. It had a huge impact. And with that body of work, I was communicating to people that their cultural history was perfect. But I wanted to try to get more specific in people embracing themselves, removing guilt and shame, so that they could have self-acceptance. And I, again, continue to think that it has to do with the acceptance of one's own body. And so the Whitney contacted me to partake in an exhibition called Image World. And Image World dealt with the media. And they said I could have 2 major locations in New York City to have a billboard. Would I want to participate? And I said, sure. And this is right after Banality. So I thought, okay, when Woman in the Tub, the piece we looked at, pieces like Pink Panther, I needed to have images of flesh that I could show my artisans making the porcelain pieces how to paint color, because normally they just put one color down, that's it. But actually you find blue in there, green, yellow, all different colors within the flesh. So I ended up buying men's magazines to be able to show them flesh, because if you show them a Vogue magazine, it's covered by fabric. And I was purchasing men's magazines to find images to show them, and I came across my ex-wife, Ilona Staller, and she was involved with pornography and doing photo spreads, and I was very, very intrigued by these images because she was extremely beautiful. And the type of fantasy that would be happening in the images, it was an Eastern European fantasy. It wasn't like Playboy or Penthouse, what I was used to. It was kind of like the girl next door. If you look at a Playboy magazine, she would have had a baseball bat, maybe a glove and a ball, and, hi. And where this was complete fantasy. This was like, the earth erupting and all the forces, kind of mythic taking place. So I was intrigued by that. And then I learned that this woman was in Parliament. And I saw a photo of her coming out of a party at Andreotti's house in Time magazine, and she had this net dress on, and I ended up collaging that into one of my banality pieces called Fête d'Hiver. So I was familiar with this Italian woman, this porn star politician, and I thought, okay, media world, what I'll do is I'll use her as a ready-made, and I'll use her photographer, I'll use her sets, I'll use everything of her imagery, and I'll just place myself in there. And it'll be like we made a movie. Now, at that time, I felt like I was an art star. But art stars really don't participate culturally too much. I mean, if you look at kind of American culture, it's all more based in film and entertainment, which is looked at as kind of socially relevant. So I thought, I'll direct as if I'm a film star. The easiest way to get into film would be a porno film. So it'll be Made in Heaven, starring Jeff Koons and Cicciolina. It was just an idea. I never made a film, but it was an idea for a film. I hired Ilona, I went there, I put myself in these positions and taking the photographs, using her sets, and we flirted with each other. She's extremely beautiful. She told me that she wanted a different life than pornography, that she ended up getting involved in pornography because of poverty in her childhood, and that she wanted a different life. And just as philosophically within my work, I've always stated that everybody is just perfect. It's about that moment forward. I accepted Ilona, and we got married, and we had a child. It ended up not working out, but I was in love with Ilona. And I think Made in Heaven really just tries to be a symbol of every man, every woman, and finding acceptance and living without guilt and shame.
Continuamos y vamos a darnos un poco de prisa porque ya estamos casi sobre la hora. Pero bueno, vienen dos piezas fundamentales.
Puppy is kind of like really the end of the Made in Heaven series because the work really kind of gets hammered a little bit in New York because of some of the imagery, and even though some of the works I'm very, very fond of. But Puppy really captures also what I was interested in. And to have a work about relationships, about control and how important control is in one's life, but the other areas where you just have to give up control. And so in planning a piece like that, there's 60,000 live growing plants there, and each one's a decision, but then you walk away and you just place it, let it in nature's hands. And certain pieces are going to shoot out 60 centimeters this way, another group's going to spread 100 centimeters in that direction. And that's how it is in life and relationships.
De todos modos, esta obra también tiene mucha relación con el barroco, ¿no? Es decir, el barroco entendido como algo arquitectónico, donde casi el ready-made, y luego también creo que en todo tu trabajo hay una relación muy fuerte con el landscape, con el gardening, con las plantas. Vemos el Pluto y Proserpina, que lo veremos luego, que tiene plantas. Muchas de sus obras, incluso que están ahora en aluminio, en steel, tienen también esa relación con la natural, ¿no? Ese doble juego, ¿no? Tenemos el easy.
This is like looking at that shoe house, you know, this idea of fantasy architecture. This has skylights. There are two heads of kind of rocking horse creatures. One's a dino and one's a pony. And I took these two profiles and put them together, and where the profiles don't meet up, you have these natural skylights. But this is like a shelter inside.
Esta pieza forma parte de Easy Fun, ¿no? Dentro de también de anterior al 90, a la mitad de los 90 es cuando Jeff hace Celebración, ¿no? Que es donde gran parte de su trabajo ha sido más conocido, quizá por la famosa venta de estas piezas de los balloons. Yo he tenido la posibilidad de verlo en la casa de Janos Dakis y en otras exposiciones, pero otra vez creo que es muy consecuente con la idea de los niños, con la idea del ready-made, pero acá sí que hay un salto tecnológico, empieza a haber en tu trabajo también, ¿no? Es decir, de las primeras piezas cast a estas grandes masas donde la tecnología, y lo vemos en la propia bailarina, cada vez va siendo parte más fundamental, es decir, son piezas que miran al pasado, pero son piezas que miran al futuro, ¿no? Es decir, a lo tecnológico. Cuéntanos de esta relación también de no solamente de la parte infantil, sino también tu relación con la tecnología, ¿no? Que poco a poco va entrando más directamente en tu trabajo.
This aspect of childhood, I think it's not so much about childhood. It's about simplicity, and it's about innocence, and it's about time. And, you know, I really believe that if you're kind of on your deathbed, that maybe right at your passing, a certain clarity may come about. And all of a sudden you could realize, oh my gosh, you know, the freedom of gesture that I had in my life, it was all right there. Why couldn't I just see this? It's right there. It's just parallel. Why didn't I realize how easy it would have been to exercise that freedom? And I think that these possibilities are found probably in the most simple places than the most, you know, kind of complex. I think what's going to, if it would happen, this revelation, and I would like to experience that tomorrow and not on my deathbed. And that's why I do the things that I do to try to exercise that freedom. But I think that there will be a sense of simplicity, and that if one can just open themselves up to their environment and accept everything, that this level of consciousness can be achieved in our life.
¿Nos puedes hablar, como te comentaba, sobre los aspectos quizás más formales a nivel de la propia producción de las piezas? Porque creo que eso es muy interesante, ver todos estos trabajos que parecen tan sencillos, tan simples, pero a la vez el rigor del estudio y de Jeff por estas piezas, por realmente producir el ready-made perfecto que él quiere, ¿no? ¿Nos puedes hablar?
Yeah. You know, when you showed the balloon dog before, the balloon dog was kind of mythic.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to make a piece that, yes, would be very much of the moment and very, very accessible, but also mythic. It's like a Trojan horse, even though it's a balloon dog, and that there's kind of a darker interior life there. That was not a ready-made. I go back to ready-mades with the lobster that you showed, and with the dolphin here, where I start to work again in the beginning of, I guess this is probably around 2003, where I start to make molds of everyday ready-made objects. But for me, the discourse is always about these things being metaphor for people. If you look at a balloon and if you look at an inflatable, if you think about the rabbit, that inflatable pink bunny, the inside, you think, oh, it's empty. And if you think about our interior life, there's a density there. There are organs, there's blood, there's tissue. So the interior life is kind of dense, and the external world is kind of void out here. It's a lot of space. But for an inflatable, all of a sudden it's different. Well, it's empty inside, so if it's empty inside, all of a sudden the outside has a little more density, and it gives you a sense of security, because all of a sudden the inside has become the outside. And so I think this is an intriguing aspect of the inflatables. And again, it's kind of a philosophical dialogue, like either or, and looking at different polarities.
Me gustaría ir ya empezando hacia el final por el tiempo y llegar a Antiquity, a esta serie a la cual pertenece Bailarina Sentada, que está ahí fuera, pero me interesan mucho estas imágenes y esta relación con la propia historia del arte. Siempre hemos estado hablando de otros artistas, otros tiempos, otros movimientos, pero creo que es muy importante esta relación desde lo prehistórico, desde estas Madonas, ¿no?, a lo más relacionado justamente con la erótica. Estos son pinturas que también pertenecen, pero es interesante cómo Jeff hace performar a una modelo para sacar esa fotografía que luego reemplazará o estas Venus y, como no, esta es Pluto y Proserpina, que fue mostrada justo junto al lado del David de Miguel Ángel en la plaza más importante de Venecia. Cuéntanos sobre cuál es la idea alrededor de Antiquity y si continúas en esta búsqueda de los objetos, de las porcelanas, de las esculturas antiguas y en esa relación un poco de esa historia del arte transversal y sobre todo en relación con el espectador. Siempre hablas de esa idea del reflejo en todas estas series, ¿no?, en estas esculturas.
Right before the Antiquity series, earlier on, actually, a couple bodies of work prior, in Celebration, I made a piece called Diamond. And diamond is like a faceted diamond, and in the front you have all your facets, and it comes back in the back to a point, and there are 4 posts around the side. And that piece to me was always the moment of creation, and those 4 posts were like the symbol of male energy, and that one symbol of male energy already entered the egg, and that was the facets of life unfolding. And as far back as you could go in human history would be to the very point in the back. And so in the Antiquity series, I wanted to show that our genes and our DNA is really the truest narrative of human history. And that this type of connectivity, that art is doing the same thing. The way that our genes connect with each other, that in the exterior world, make different references in connectivity, different references are paralleling that. And that through these connections, through loving Manet and through Manet loving Goya, and through Goya enjoying Velázquez, and Velázquez enjoying Greek sculpture like Ariadne, and just this continued tie back through history, that it can change your genes and your DNA. And we know that momentarily that happens. Science has not shown that it can be sustained. I believe it can be sustained. I'm a different person than I was before I saw Manet's work. My genes are different. I feel that's a fact. Science may say different. But I believe that this type of parallel and connectivity is what art is doing. It's paralleling our body to change our body. Our exterior life and the enjoyment of our exterior world is also trying to change our interior world.
Bueno, llegamos a Bailarina Sentada dentro de esta serie Antiquity y justamente ayer nos comentaba Jeff la importancia también no solamente a nivel conceptual de la pieza, sino también a nivel formal, porque hay nuevas técnicas de producción de ella que han formado parte de este proceso para llegar justamente al ready-made perfecto y a esa idea donde el público, donde ustedes van a poder reflejarse y sobre todo también porque la escultura ahora tiene el color, ¿no? Los colores aproximados de la propia porcelana a la que pertenece, ¿no? ¿Puedes contarnos más del objeto en sí? ¿Cómo lo encuentras?
The Antiquity series, I would look at different figurines, and I would respond to certain ones that I enjoyed, and I wanted certain images that were contemporary kind of Aphrodite figures. And so the seated ballerina comes from a Russian porcelain. It's probably originally about 6 inches tall. And when I enlarge these pieces, first I give them a CAT scan. So I collect all the data, both from the inside of the work and the outside. I also white light scan it and then merge that information together. So every perfection and imperfection is also maintained within this mirrored surface of the piece. And the reason, again, for the reflectivity is the affirmation of the viewer. It's like the first slide we looked at with the inflatable bunny and flower, that when you move, everything changes, the abstraction changes. Without you, nothing happens. And it's about your own vision, your own possibilities, your own excitement. And I think somebody could look at that and be intrigued by the sensitivity, by the feminism, the quality of the tutu going around, the feminine form, and at the same time, just the possibility, whatever their interest could be. I think it brings the most complex aspect of the Baroque together with the most simple and pure aspects of minimalism.
Jeff, creo que lo tenemos que dejar aquí. Me están haciendo señas. Simplemente, antes de despedirnos, me gustaría hablar de ese pasado, de ese presente y de ese futuro. ¿Dónde está Jeff Koons? Ahora, ¿en qué está trabajando? Había otra serie que creo que ustedes conocen, que es la famosa serie de las glazing balls, que son estas esferas azules en las cuales también participó de la promoción del disco de Lady Gaga y otras series que continúa. Pero, ¿en qué estás trabajando para el futuro y dónde te ves tú dentro de 40 años? Es decir, ¿qué es lo que la gente como artista te gustaría que pensara o recordara justamente de esto, de tu trabajo?
Well, I have to say, I really enjoy being right here at this moment. I mean, I'm really thrilled to be here, and I feel a sense of I would like to continue a dialogue with Buenos Aires. I'd like to continue with the Malva Museum. And I mean, I'm really thrilled. That's the exciting thing about the art world. I mean, artists have always used to travel the world and interact with different communities. You would have different dealers all over the world and different artists to associate with. And that's what's wonderful about being an artist and participating in the community. So this is really wonderful and very, very meaningful, and what I get the greatest enjoyment from. But as an artist, I want to reach my potential. I mean, I am so grateful to everybody that has been supportive to me and has let me have a platform to let my ideas flourish. But I want to do it. I want to participate. I want to be the best artist I can be. I want to be the best father I can be. I want to be the best husband. I want to be the best person within the community I can be. But the platform for me as an artist to try to share acceptance, and that, because this is really what I believe in. I believe that for my understanding of being able to reach potential, that if you don't accept, if you use judgment, in so many areas in life you'll hear that, oh, the only way to live an intellectual life is to make judgment, that you have to be discerning and you have to make judgment. That, you know, you can find significance in different things at different times in your life. One moment, one thing may have more significance than another, but it doesn't mean that that other object has any, or image, etc., these are all metaphor for people, is any less relevant than anything else. So it's to keep everything in play. And I find that when I do that, and I really focus on doing that, that it's the most metaphysical state that I can reach, and time and space bend. You walk down the street and everybody looks familiar, and you really connect to the universal. I want to walk out of Plato's cave. I want to do it as an artist, and I want to try to achieve that, and I'd like to share that with the community.
Jeff, ha sido un verdadero placer. Un aplauso. Un verdadero placer. Yo continuaría contigo hablando y hablando y hablando, pero tenemos que dejarlo aquí, y no dejarlo aquí, sino que ahora les invitamos a pasar a dar por inaugurada y para conocer en la explanada de Malva esta hermosa bailarina y tener, como no, la presentación de Eduardo Costantini y Jeff para todo el público que nos está esperando. Muchas gracias.